Okay, the final chapter in Business 137, Unit 3 on organizing is Chapter 9, talking about managing diversity and inclusiveness. So let's look at the learning objectives. So the U.S. workforce has changed tremendously over the last 50 years. I think we can all see it by the statistics as the workforce is getting older. It's getting much more culturally diverse. Minorities are growing, and Caucasian population as a percentage of the total is declining. So that has lots of challenges and lots of opportunities for organizations. So objective number 2, if you well manage diversity, it can give you an extremely competitive edge. So, because one of the key things to running a business is knowing your customers. So if you don't, if your customer base is changing and you don't understand them, or you don't have a diversity of ideas, or the ideas aren't challenged, you run the risk, if you're not diverse, of really losing a competitive edge. So having diversity in your management and in your organization and having those diverse ideas expressed can be a huge competitive advantages. Identify the challenges. Well, the challenges of a diverse workforce is often we don't understand the other person's culture, and therefore we'll make potentially erroneous assumptions. So we'll talk a little bit about power distance. In some cultures, the power distance is very, very high. So people from high power distance cultures, i.e. they have a huge respect for authority. For example, the Japanese culture. Sometimes if I just ask employees to vent their frustrations or tell me their problems, that oftentimes won't work because culturally they don't think that they should express their ideas or they should complain. Now, the American person that's a low power distance might view that person as not challenging enough. Why didn't they challenge the person? Counterly, the Japanese person might view the U.S. person who complains and vocalizes their complaints to management as disrespectful. So oftentimes, if we don't understand the cultural differences, we can have challenges where our workforce don't get along. Number 4, monopolistic is single. So you have a single point of view. Pluralistic is many. And multicultural is just where you have many different cultures. Number 5, steps managers and their organizations can take to cultivate diversity. Well, first of all, you have to hire. You have to put in your hiring process that you go to, schools that have diversity, that are culturally diverse. And then I think you have to have some training programs so people understand culture and appreciate culture. And to me, the biggest thing is you have to not just talk the game, you have to actually demonstrate it. So, if I talk that I'm a culturally diverse organization, but my entire board of directors is all white, 60-year-old males, it sends a message to employees that maybe it's more talk than actual doing. Summarize the skills and knowledge about cultural differences needed to manage globally. Well, the skills set is really an understanding of the differences in cultures and understanding how different people can be very culturally different, but it's the way the culture they're within. So affirmative action, now we'll flip through these really quick. Affirmative action is just where you give a special effort to recruit people that have been discriminated against in the past. Managing diversity, we talked about this. Brief history, I think most of us are aware from this. Civil Rights Act of 1964. Women were excluded from certain jobs. I wish you were in class. We do an interesting case study on that. And components of diversity. Then it talks about the glass ceiling, where whether we're talking about women or other minorities, this is where I talk about walking the talk. If you say you're really going to be diverse, you've got to have, I think, some women and minority higher up in your organization. Then it talks about sexual harassment, quid pro quo. That's where I say, if you do this, I'll do this. There's and you can also create a very hostile environment. You need to train folks on this stuff because there's a basics of harassment policies, minorities and immigrants, a whole bunch of examples of successful immigrants in the business world, mentally and physically disabled folks. How do we incorporate them into our workforce? They're the largest share of unemployed and minorities. Tomorrow's workers are going to vary. As I talked about, the population is getting much older. A lot of people aren't going to retire. Pension plans aren't going to be around. But smart folks can take a great opportunity at this, particularly if they understand what older workers want. Older workers oftentimes want part-time work. Oftentimes are financially responsible, so money isn't the big motivator. They just want extra income to their pension. And you can see, not surprisingly, that the percentage of minorities is going to increase and the number of whites are going to come way down. Not a big surprise there. Challenges to manage. Well, potentially lower cohesiveness, mistrust. I think a lot of that's because they don't understand the cultures, stereotyping, communication difficulties. All of these, you need a big challenge around understanding the differences in cultures. Monopolistic organization we walk through, pluralistic organization we walk through, multicultural organization we walked through. Again, we talked about recruit, accommodate, and make sure you have alternative working arrangements, support groups, mentoring, mentors. This is a wonderful thing. I strongly encourage you to have mentors as you go through your career. Expats, those are folks that are working overseas at a foreign subsidiary. Host countries, third world countries. And ethnocentrist is where a tendency to think that our band or our team or our company or our country has all the answers and is superior to everybody else. Culture shock, I think most of us are familiar with. Here are some cultural differences I talked about. Very interesting. These are Hostetler's 4 or 5. Power distance is simply whether your culture, the degree to which you respect authority. Do you have a high respect for authority and in fact you never question it? Or do you have a culture where you're supposed to question? If you think if the boss is running us off the cliff, I'm supposed to tell the boss that. Individualist versus collectivism. It talks about, should the decision be what's best for the individual? Should the decision be what's best for the collective group? So if I'm, for example, doing a labor negotiations, an individualist would want, hey, if I'm in the top 10%, they get a bonus that nobody else gets. It's 20% more. If I'm more of a collectivist, I say, no, the raise should be 5% across the board. So some cultures are very individualistic, some cultures are very collectivism. And again, you run into assumptions. If I see a guy that's very individualistic and I'm from a collectivist culture, I look at that individual and I say, boy, that person's really, really selfish. If I'm an individualist and I see a guy from a collectivist culture saying, no, it should be fair, everybody should get the same wage rate across the board, I look at that individual and I might say, gee, they're very they don't want to, why don't they want to reward the best? And it's understanding that it's more that they come from different cultures, which is helpful. Uncertainty avoidance is simply some cultures, They want to avoid uncertainty. Other cultures, they're very happy with uncertainty. So again, if we're negotiating a contract, very uncertain folks would want it a long term. I want the contract to go for 10 years. Someone that's not afraid of uncertainty avoidance says, no, I want it tied to how well the company does and changes every year. And you can go through all of these, and that's about it for this chapter. Thanks. Hope this helped.